It's early morning in the port city of Ostia, just southwest of Rome. The year is 119 CE, during the reign of Emperor Hadrian. As the sun rises lazily over the Tiber River, the city is already stirring with slow, deliberate motion. In the grain warehouses along the riverbanks, there is the sound of boots on stone, of brush-bristled brooms sweeping flour from tiled floors, and of the quiet muttering of men with ledgers. Among them walks a figure seldom remembered in heroic tales or grand battles, the Annona inspector, a Roman grain inspector. You wouldn't have feared him, admired him, or even remembered his name, but the entire city depended on him. You may be picturing the vast, dramatic theaters of Rome or the violent roars of the Colosseum, but this story is not about those spectacles. This is the story of how Rome fed itself, grain by grain, sack by sack, and how it built one of the most complex logistical systems in the ancient world to do so. And, perhaps more importantly, how it depended on a meticulous, often dust-covered, bureaucratic class to keep it from crumbling. Let's walk alongside one of them. His name is Tiberius Flavius Crispus. Not a senator, not a general, not a poet. His job? Inspecting grain at the Portus grain terminals before it's funneled into Rome's food system. He carries a small wooden writing tablet, bound in cord, the wax smooth and re-smoothed again. His stylus is blunt on one end, sharp on the other. He wears wool tunic layers, practical and plain. He's already sweating, even before the sun clears the skyline. The grain dust clings to everything. It gets under his fingernails, into his sandals, up his nose. He doesn't complain. He records. The Roman grain supply, known as the Annona, was more than a trade network. It was a civic promise. In the 1st and 2nd centuries CE, the city of Rome was home to more than 1 million people. Feeding them daily required not just abundant harvests, but a state-managed distribution system of immense complexity. Much of this food came from distant provinces, Egypt, North Africa, Sicily, and was carried by sea to Ostia and Portus, Rome's primary ports. From there, it was stored in enormous warehouses, Perea, before being transported along the Via Ostiensis or up the Tiber River into Rome. And here is where Crispus comes in. His task, to ensure that what arrived matched what was recorded. Weight, moisture, purity, spoilage, theft, bribery, grain tampering. All of these were his concern. There was no digital ledger, no barcode scanner. Only lists, hand-copied figures, and physical samples. Each shipment required verification. A slight miscalculation in moisture could lead to spoilage. A careless count could create a deficit. And in a city reliant on monthly fermentations, state-sponsored grain distributions to its citizens, error meant riots. Crispus checks a new delivery. The sacks are supposed to weigh about 90 Roman pounds each, roughly 30 kilograms. He watches as slaves unload them from a barge, muttering in Egyptian and Punic, overseen by a foreman with a tired eye and a thick rope whip. Crispus walks over to the Libra, a scale mounted on a stone pedestal. He records the weight, 87 pounds, then 89, Then 92. He marks a discrepancy. It's minor, but consistent. The warehouse official raises an eyebrow. Humidity, he says in Latin. There was fog in Cyrene when they left. Crispus says nothing. He scratches a mark into the wax and moves on. But grain is more than weight. He cuts a sample from one of the sacks, places it in a small ceramic bowl, and blows gently. Light husks flutter upward. There are small dark specks at the bottom, perhaps stones, perhaps rodent droppings. He leans closer. One by one, he picks them out with a reed tool. He places them in a small leather pouch labeled Contaminatio. If too many such findings are made, he will escalate the matter to the Praefectus Annoni, the prefect of the grain supply. That office, elevated to equestrian rank, was considered among the most important in the imperial administration. The grain inspectors served as its eyes and hands. Without them, shortages would go unnoticed until they erupted in the forum. But not all errors were honest. Some grain merchants watered the grain sacks to add weight. Others mixed old grain with new, or stored shipments too long before transporting them. A few bribes could help an inspector overlook a minor infraction. But the price of being caught was high. Penalties included the loss of rights, fines, beatings, or even exile. Crispus was not rich, but he was cautious. He accepted no bribes. He never borrowed money. He recorded everything. He was, if nothing else, dependable. Around noon, he moves to another warehouse. This one is newer, with freshly plastered walls and the smell of lime still in the air. Inside are amphorae, ceramic storage vessels, lined in tight rows. These contain olive oil, garum, and pulses. Crispus is not assigned to them, but he admires their order. He runs a finger along one, and it comes away oily. Outside, carts rattle along the stone-paved road. Each one is weighed at the Publica Libre station before continuing into the city. Once in Rome, the grain will be distributed by the curators Annoni, then handed out to citizens in the Subura, the Esquiline, and beyond. Back at his bench, Crispus eats a quiet lunch: bread, cheese, dates, and watered wine. He writes a few notes: today's ship name, the barge number, a comment about the state of the sacks. He seals his notes with a blob of wax and presses the stamp of the Annona office into it. It's unremarkable, but vital. The daily work of the Annona was the slow pulse of the city's survival. Without men like Crispus, Rome could not eat. Without grain, there were no spectacles, no forums, no marble statues. The Roman Empire, in all its majesty, rested quietly, invisibly, on bales of wheat and the quiet vigilance of dusty men with styluses. At the end of the day, Crispus records that 42 sacks were acceptable for underweight, 2 flagged for contamination. He signs his name. He closes the ledger. He sneezes. Dust, always the dust. He returns home through narrow streets where the smell of fish sauce competes with donkey manure and burning charcoal. No monuments will bear his name. No bust will be carved of his likeness. And yet, when Rome burned in later centuries, historians did not trace its fall to sword or fire. They found its weakness in supply chains, in famine, in corrupt record-keeping. The cracks began not with invasions, but with forgotten books and broken ledgers. So as you fall asleep to the soft clatter of sacks and the scratch of stylus on wax, ask yourself, what becomes of an empire when no one counts the grain? From field to forum, how the grain got there. Before Crispus weighed a single sack in the port of Ostia, before he blew away the husks or dipped his fingers into the grain for moisture checks, an entire world of movement had already occurred. A system, ancient even by its time, had mobilized farmers, scribes, sailors, warehousemen, and teamsters to move grain across hundreds, sometimes thousands, of miles. In this quiet section of Roman history, we explore how grain traveled from the wheat fields of Africa and Egypt to the stone vaults of Rome. Let's begin in Egypt, the breadbasket of the empire. By the time of the Principate, Egypt alone was responsible for producing roughly one-third of Rome's imported grain. The Nile Delta, with its flat plains, dependable seasonal flooding, and fine alluvial soil, was perfect for wheat. Under Roman administration, landowners, some local, some Roman, were expected to hand over portions of their yield to the state. This was the tributum soli, a land tax paid in kind. Once harvested in late spring or early summer, the wheat was bundled, threshed, and sorted by laborers who had little ownership over the product they produced. Some were wage laborers, others were enslaved. Their daily rhythms were tied to ancient calendars and river tides. It was slow, dusty work, cutting with curved sickles, drying sheaves under the sun, then carrying bundles by hand or ox cart to the nearest river dock. There, the wheat began its first journey, by canal barge down the Nile to Alexandria. Alexandria was more than a cultural center. It was one of the great logistical hubs of the Roman world. Warehouses known as Horia Alexandrina held grain in vast ceramic jars and massive granaries. These buildings were carefully ventilated, and many were elevated on pillars to avoid rodents and flooding. Roman officials stationed in Egypt oversaw this process. Each shipment was recorded, each merchant vetted. Errors meant delay. Delays meant trouble in Rome. And if the ships didn't leave by the summer winds, the Etesian winds, which reliably blew northward across the Mediterranean, they might not make it at all before storm season. When ready, grain was loaded into ships, novice honorarii, or cargo ships. These were not elegant vessels. They were short-beamed, deep-bellied, and built to carry weight, not speed. A typical grain ship could carry 300 tons. Larger ones held up to 1,200 tons of grain. They moved slowly, with one or two large square sails, and required calm seas. The voyage from Alexandria to Ostia could take 2 to 4 weeks, longer if storms or pirates delayed them. Roman authorities provided convoys and naval escorts when necessary, and private shipping guilds often worked under state contract. It is important to understand that shipping grain was an act of controlled risk. The cargo had to remain dry and ventilated. Mildew could destroy entire loads. And the grain had to be balanced within the hull, or the ship would list dangerously. Much depended on the skill of the shipwright and the calm of the captain. Crispus, in his logbook, might simply note, "Ship Numidia arrived. 280 sacks. Ostia Dock 7." But behind that dry line was an epic of quiet navigation. Once in Ostia, the ships were unloaded by dockworkers known as sicarii. These men, often organized into collegia or guilds, hauled sacks on their backs, transferred them to carts or mules, or moved them into horia located just off the docks. Their work was strenuous and constant. The ports ran at all hours during grain season. Fires lit the night skies as carts moved like insects through the city. The warehouses themselves were architectural marvels. The Horia Galbe, for example, could store up to 140,000 tons of grain. These buildings featured thick stone walls to regulate temperature, raised floors, and narrow slits for air circulation. Inside, sacks were stacked, labeled, and watched over by warehouse supervisors, Horurii. Their records fed into the same system that Crispus served. But most of the grain didn't stay in Ostia. Instead, it made its way into Rome itself, either by barge up the Tiber or overland via Via Portuensis. The barges were towed by teams of men or animals walking on towpaths along the riverbanks, a slow and sweaty job. In high water season, the trip could be done in 2 days. In drought, it could take a week or more. Once in Rome, the grain entered public granaries. The most notable of these was the Porticus Minutia Fermentaria, where distributions were made. Citizens entitled to free or subsidized grain received their monthly allotments here. At its peak, over 150,000 Roman citizens were registered under the Fermentatio program. It was one of the earliest examples of a welfare state, and it required extensive administrative oversight. The distributions weren't chaotic. Each citizen carried a tessera fermentaria, a small, inscribed token that entitled them to a specific amount. These were checked against ledgers, sometimes challenged, occasionally forged. Inspectors oversaw even this final step. It was not a fast system. People waited. The lines were long. The mood depended on the season. In good years, there was patience. In lean years, tension. But why did Rome go through all this trouble? It wasn't only about feeding the people. It was about control. Emperors knew that full stomachs meant quiet streets. The panem et circenses, bread and games, policy was not poetic metaphor. It was policy. A riot over grain prices could destroy a prefect's career. A shortfall could cast doubt on an emperor's legitimacy. The failure to deliver grain was not seen as a minor administrative hiccup. It was a civic emergency. Back at the Annona office, Crispus was not thinking in such grand terms. He was concerned that the latest shipment from Carthage was damp. He recorded his notes. He sent a warning to the warehouse officer. He did not speak of imperial stability. He merely did his job. And that, in many ways, is the lesson. The Roman Empire, mighty and adorned in marble, stood because of countless small acts. Quiet laborers, diligent inspectors, anonymous dock workers, unthanked administrators. Their names are not etched on triumphal arches, but they form the foundation. By the time grain reached a Roman oven and was turned into coarse panis plebeius, it had traveled hundreds of miles, passed dozens of hands, and been weighed and measured by forgotten men like Crispus. Still, a lingering thought remains. What happened when the winds failed? When the Nile didn't flood? When ships were delayed or the records were wrong? When the sacks run dry, shortages, sabotage, and the quiet collapse? You've followed the journey of the grain, from Nile floodplains to Egyptian barges, from the Mediterranean to Ostia's docks, and finally to the ledger-scratched hands of men like Crispus. But what happens when something goes wrong? Not dramatically wrong, not the fiery collapse of empire, but something quieter, more persistent, something bureaucratic, something boring. Let's revisit the year 123 CE. Tiberius Flavius Crispus arrives at the Portus grain terminal earlier than usual. He is not alone. A group of inspectors from the Praefectus Annonis office has been dispatched to investigate complaints from Rome. The fermentations were short the previous month. Some citizens received half their allotment. Others received grain blackened with rot. The usual causes are already being whispered: bad weather in Africa, poor planning, bribery. But none of those explanations comfort the families waiting in the Subura. For them, the granaries were empty. Bread prices had jumped. Bakers had reduced rations or shut down. Tensions simmered. It's not the first time this has happened. Records from the imperial archives show that grain shortfalls were regular features of the Roman Empire. They happened during droughts, when the Nile failed to flood. They occurred during political instability, when provincial governors withheld shipments. Sometimes, pirates off the coast of Crete or Libya intercepted cargo. Other times, corruption or negligence along the route. One bad entry in a shipping manifest, one bribe accepted by a dock clerk, led to cascading shortages. The trouble is rarely pinpointed to a single cause. Instead, it is usually a soft failure, 1,000 minor miscalculations, oversights, or natural challenges accumulating until the sacks arrive too late or not at all. This month, Crispus suspects mold. The last shipment from Egypt came in late, and the sacks had been stacked too tightly. Without adequate airflow, heat and moisture built up. Mold spread invisibly at first. Now, the evidence is clear. Black dust in the corners of the horia, the musty scent of decay, the discoloration of the grain at the center of the stacks. He opens one sack with his stylus and winces. Even from a foot away, the smell is pungent. The grain is soft, clumping, no good for baking, dangerous if consumed. He documents it meticulously. Sack number, shipment ID, warehouse corner, supervisor on duty, all noted in his wax tablet. He sends his findings up the chain. But the damage is done. Across the city, bread supplies have dipped. Lines at the Porticus Minutia are longer. Some citizens grumble, others shout. Officials attempt to explain the situation with public proclamations, but rumors spread faster than facts. Some say the Egyptians are hoarding grain. Others claim the prefect has sold the grain to the army. The truth is more mundane. A few delays, some heat, poor ventilation, and a late summer delivery. Still, for Rome, food is politics. Emperor Hadrian himself is notified. He knows well that his popularity among the plebeians rests not on speeches or monuments, but on full granaries. He orders an investigation. He releases emergency grain from imperial reserves, stored deep in private vaults. He sends letters to North Africa urging increased output for the next season. But he also understands that this crisis, small though it may seem, reveals a deeper fragility. Even at its height, the Roman grain system depended on uninterrupted flows, seasonal predictability, and bureaucratic vigilance. If any part broke down, the whole machine slowed. And in an empire spanning 3 continents, distance was always a risk. Crispus continues his rounds, the tension in the city rising quietly around him. He doesn't carry a sword, doesn't command troops. But the future of Rome, its peace, its rhythm, its stomachs, rests partly on his notes. In the days that follow, additional inspectors arrive. Warehouses are cleaned. New protocols are implemented. Fresh shipments are expedited from Carthage. Slowly, the shelves begin to refill. But the events leave their mark. The shortage becomes a case study, cited in future records by Anoni scribes. It is included in lectures for new inspectors. It serves as a warning. The system works until it doesn't. Crispus, for his part, grows quieter. He remains in his post for another decade. He never rises beyond his modest station, never receives honors. But the record shows that his ledgers were never challenged. His counts remain precise. He dies in 134 CE. His house is modest. His tablet and seal are buried with him. Years later, as the empire faces more serious famines and border pressures, the quiet work of men like Crispus is forgotten. Historians remember generals and emperors, but they forget the inspectors, the weights, the grain logs. And yet, isn't that where so many great declines begin? Not in war, but in grain. Not in fire, but in fungus. Not with a sword, but with an unmarked sack in a warm warehouse. So, as we close this quiet tale of logistics and ledgers, consider this. When an empire is made of marble, but eats bread, who keeps the marble standing? How the Edo period police cataloged umbrellas in Japan. The quiet bureaucracy of reign and order. Let's travel to Edo, the city we now call Tokyo. It's the mid-18th century, during the reign of the Tokugawa shogunate. The streets are damp. The paper lanterns flicker in the light breeze, and the cobbled alleys glisten under a persistent drizzle. Somewhere, a wooden get-a-sandal splashes through a shallow puddle. Umbrellas bloom across the city like muted flowers. Oil paper, bamboo-ribbed, round and practical. You may think of the samurai, of sword duels and haiku. But not today. Today, we follow a man with a notebook. His name is Inaba Jirobiai, and his job is to write down the details of umbrellas. He is a yuriki, a mid-ranking officer in the Mashabugyo, or the city magistrate's office. The Mashabugyo were powerful administrators responsible for civil order, tax collection, firefighting, judicial proceedings, and, perhaps less famously, umbrella regulation. You might ask, Why would anyone regulate umbrellas? The answer lies in the shogunate's deep concern for social order, identification, and predictability. Edo had over 1 million residents at its peak, and it was a city perpetually anxious about crime, rebellion, and improper behavior. With a rigid caste system in place, samurai, farmers, artisans, merchants, people were expected to look, act, and dress according to their class. Even their tools, accessories, and modes of transport were subject to scrutiny. The umbrella, or wagesa, while seemingly mundane, was one such object. It was essential in the city's rainy climate, but it was also a portable object, easily stolen, borrowed, or misused. Moreover, certain designs or colors were associated with class rank or specific professions. Merchants might favor subdued black oil paper, kabuki actors, more decorative styles, samurai, simple bamboo frame designs with lacquered handles. The magistrate's office issued regulations to ensure umbrellas were identifiable and returnable, and to minimize theft. An everyday issue in a densely populated wooden city where most possessions were left in entranceways or shared spaces. Inaba Jirobiai's task was simple. Document umbrellas submitted to his office as lost, stolen, or found. His notebook was filled with descriptions, not of murderers or swordsmen, but of umbrellas. Page after page, lined in precise brushstrokes. One oil paper umbrella, chestnut brown, torn along third rib from right. Initials SK on bamboo shaft. Black lacquer handle. Umbrella painted with red maple leaf. Reported missing at Bathhouse District. Found near bridge at Nyanbashi. Smells faintly of sake. He would enter these umbrellas into a catalog of lost items, which was posted on boards outside the magistrate's office for public viewing. In a sense, these records were early urban lost and found databases, and umbrellas featured heavily. Edo's citizens were surprisingly diligent. If someone found a lost umbrella, it was customary to turn it in, either to the magistrate's box or to a nearby koban or police booth. Citizens could later reclaim their items by giving a matching description. In some cases, people made formal complaints about stolen umbrellas, which then required official investigation. One Yuriki's week might include interviewing a tea house apprentice about a misplaced parasol, questioning a merchant whose umbrella was borrowed by a traveling monk, or comparing the ink-stamped monogram on a returned umbrella against the registry's entries. There's no record of Jirobiai solving a major case through an umbrella, but then again, that wasn't the point. The umbrella registry was part of a larger philosophy, control through mundane precision. Inaba's office was a tatami-matted room with stacks of scrolls, brushes, and an inkstone kept warm under a coal's basin. He wore his official badge, a small piece of wood known as a heitatsufuda, tucked into his obi belt, and carried a short sword more for form than function. His days were spent listening to citizens' reports, inspecting umbrellas, and recording everything with deliberate strokes. His cursive brushwork, though not elegant, was legible, and that was enough. Some umbrellas were never claimed. These were auctioned periodically, with records kept of buyers and sale prices. The money often went to the city treasury, or in some cases, to temple charity funds. In rare moments, Jerobi made notes in the margins of his registry, observations of little consequence, but rich in texture. Handle worn smooth. Owner may have carried it daily for many years. Design too elaborate for a merchant, possibly borrowed from employer. Returned umbrella with attached poem. Unusual. Poem retained. The poem read, "Rain falls gently upon us all slash, yet only the umbrella knows who we are." Such entries never entered the official record. They were tucked into Jerobi's private scroll, a log not of justice, but of passing human detail. The Edo umbrella records may sound tedious, even unnecessary, but they served real purposes. First, they reduced petty theft. People knew they were being watched, even if just in minor ways. A stolen umbrella, once described and posted, might be recognized in public. The embarrassment alone was deterrent enough. Second, the system encouraged public trust. A laborer who lost his only rain covering could come to the office with a hope, however faint, that his possession might be found and returned. In a society steeped in formal obligations, this mattered. Third, it reinforced class boundaries. Umbrella design was tightly connected to fashion, which was itself tied to social status. Regulations ensured that commoners didn't emulate the designs of samurai or wealthy merchants. And yet, not everyone followed the rules. Some umbrellas were forged, imitation lacquer, fake merchant seals, or disguised handles. A small economy of second-hand umbrellas flourished in back alleys, sold by itinerant peddlers without registration. These black market umbrellas sometimes bore signs of multiple owners, patches from different repairs, initials half scraped away. Jerobi, like most of his peers, turned a blind eye to these. As long as no complaint was filed and no riot loomed, it was better not to press too hard. After all, Edo's peace was built on balance, not force. His workday usually ended by dusk. He would clean his brushes, brush the ash from his lap, and roll up the day's pages. The umbrella records were kept in cedar boxes, tied with faded cord, and labeled by season. Spring umbrellas, summer umbrellas, autumn parasols, winter staffs, a poetic kind of accounting. Years later, historians would find some of these scrolls. The entries told no heroic tales, but they did something else. They preserved a city's rhythm, its texture, and the quiet diligence of forgotten bureaucrats. So, as you close your eyes tonight and imagine Edo under gentle rainfall, remember the man with the brush and the city that once believed every umbrella should have a name. But one might ask, what happens when too many umbrellas go unclaimed? Registry Inc. and the rule of rain. The sound of gentle rain on clay roof tiles fills the alleys of Edo again. It is a city always ready for precipitation, and in the quiet back office of the magistrate's quarters, Yuriki Inaba Jerobi is again dipping his brush into ink. The rain may be eternal, but the records must stay dry. The scroll before him smells faintly of cedar and ash, and he has begun work on the winter umbrella register, 10 May 4. To outsiders, the scroll might seem almost poetic, line after line of calm observations, as though he were writing a seasonal diary. But to Jerobi and his fellow clerks, it is administrative architecture, the subtle scaffolding holding the city together. You might ask, what kind of government takes umbrellas this seriously? The Tokugawa shogunate did. By the mid-Edo period, the regime had matured into an impressive, if quietly autocratic, bureaucracy. Its philosophy was rooted in Neo-Confucian order, where hierarchy and duty were fundamental. The Mashabugyo, the urban magistrates, acted as judges, tax officers, and police commanders all in one. Under them, Yuriki like Jerobi handled the fine details. It was a governance style not built on spectacle or speeches, but on classification, rules, and logs. Umbrellas may not have been a matter of life and death, but in a city of over 1 million, where possessions were often shared, borrowed, or lost, ownership had to be legible. Each umbrella report followed a quiet protocol. Description of material: oil paper, bamboo, cotton wrapping. Handle style: smooth lacquered, rough pine, wrapped in twine. Decorations: painted family crest, seasonal flower motif, plain brown. Condition: split rib, torn canopy, molded corner, dripping wax stain. Origin: if known, borrowed from bathhouse. Shop inventory: samurai's umbrella left at theater. For each report, Jerobi created a unique entry with a number. This made retrieval easier. Each umbrella entered into the log received a tag, which would be tied around its handle or frame using string, often rice paper labels written in black sumi ink. If claimed, the label was cut and handed to the claimant. The umbrella returned, the page sealed. If unclaimed, the umbrella remained, and the record stayed open. Some umbrellas sat in racks for years. Others were eventually moved to the storeroom beside the office, where they were hung from bamboo rails like silent lanterns, their handles swaying faintly with every footstep. Some months yielded only a handful of entries, quiet, wet stretches with little theft or loss. But other seasons, especially during festivals or large markets, saw dozens of umbrellas entered and searched for. Seasonal events caused surges. During the spring Hinamitsuri festival, paper parasols with ornate chrysanthemum designs flooded the streets. In the Rainier autumn season, plain oil paper umbrellas became popular and easier to confuse. One particularly rainy October, a Bozu, traveling Buddhist monk, reported that his umbrella had been stolen near the Kanda Bridge. But after 3 days, the item was returned with an apology note attached. It reads simply, "Mistaken during downpour. Borrowed briefly. Regret the confusion." No punishment was issued. This reflects the culture of honorable return in Edo society. Citizens were often reluctant to admit wrongdoing, but equally reluctant to be seen as unjust. Items were quietly returned at night or through go-betweens, and magistrates, preferring not to clog the courts, allowed these quiet resolutions. Still, not all cases were peaceful. There are records of umbrella thefts tied to identity fraud. A low-ranking samurai once reported his crest-painted umbrella stolen. Days later, it was found in the hands of a traveling peddler attempting to pass himself off as a retainer of a noble house. He was punished with public humiliation, a form of street-side shaming common in Edo. The umbrella, now tainted by the crime, was not reclaimed. It was burned. These episodes highlight how the umbrella served as more than shelter. It was a class marker, an extension of the self. Possessing the wrong kind was not just theft. It was improper representation, a social disruption. Jirobiai's role was not to resolve every case personally. Rather, he provided documentation, a kind of legal atmosphere through which order could be maintained. His entries helped trace patterns, verify claims, and support minor court proceedings. He knew how to read the grain of bamboo, recognize regional styles of rib wrapping, and distinguish between Edo-made lacquerwork and imports from Kyoto or Omi province. Sometimes, a dispute would arise between two claimants. In such cases, the umbrella's construction details, length of ribs, handle stain, or unique cracks became evidence. The magistrate, assisted by Jirobiai, would examine the object like a relic, weighing each statement. In one unusual case, two women claimed the same umbrella, a hand-painted canopy with plum blossom motifs. The case was escalated to the magistrate himself. Both women described the umbrella's features accurately. In the end, the tie-breaking detail was a faint ink blot on the inner lining, visible only when the umbrella was opened fully. One claimant mentioned it, the other did not. The matter was resolved. Jirobiai made a marginal note. Ink, perhaps spilled by child, a detail unnoticed but not untrue. Memory is more fragile than paper. The umbrella registry grew year by year. New ledgers were bound in silk covers. Boxes were stacked higher. When the fire inspectors conducted their annual safety checks, they always eyed the storeroom nervously. So much oil paper in one place. But the scrolls themselves became valuable. Historians would one day look to these umbrella logs to understand fashion, class, trade networks, and even weather patterns. They noticed that after a particularly strong typhoon season, umbrella design changed citywide. Wider ribs, heavier lacquer, reinforced stitching, all evident not in architecture or poetry, but in lost and found descriptions. Jirobiai, ever diligent, began keeping seasonal summaries. Spring Tenmei 4. Plum motifs increased. Light drizzle common. Summer Tenmei 5. Sudden gusts damaged many parasols. Noted 5 broken shafts. Autumn Tenmei 6. 2 umbrellas claimed by monks. 1 returned, 1 unclaimed. His summaries were not required. They weren't even read by his superiors. But he wrote them anyway. Perhaps the most striking thing about the umbrella registry is how little changed over the decades. The procedures remained. The ink, the string, the storage, all continued with minor variation. It was, in a way, a ritual of civic order. No proclamation required. No ceremony needed. Umbrellas came and went. Names were logged and forgotten. But the system endured. Rain fell, and with it, the weightless responsibility of shelter. Still, there were signs that the tide of time was shifting. Western imports had begun to trickle into port towns. A new kind of umbrella, metal-ribbed, collapsible, was seen occasionally in Yokohama. At first, they were dismissed as fragile novelties, but their presence hinted at something larger, a changing world. Would such umbrellas be registered the same way? Would they blend into the system or dismantle it? Jirobi, now gray-haired, touched the lacquered handle of an older umbrella one evening. Its ribs creaked when opened. He recorded its features one last time, then placed it gently on the return shelf. And he wondered, what happens when the rain keeps falling, but no one writes it down? The last umbrella ledger. It is now the late 1850s. The city of Edo still pulses with lantern light and the clatter of wooden geta, but change is whispering through the paper walls. Ships, black, foreign, and steaming, have begun appearing in distant bays. But in the quiet corridors of the magistrate's office, the familiar rituals of umbrella documentation still persist. Yuriki Inaba Jirobi, now well past 60, continues his work. His hair is thinner. His writing hand, once firm and meticulous, now wavers slightly. The scrolls are heavier. The ink dries slower. But the umbrellas still come. And yet something is different. The umbrella racks, once neatly filled with oil paper wagesa, are showing signs of neglect. A few hang torn, mold-stained from last year's monsoon season. One has a cracked rib that no one has repaired. The storeroom smells faintly of mildew and time. Young apprentices, who once waited eagerly to learn the brush strokes of registration, now speak instead of iron umbrellas, foldable ones brought in from Nagasaki and Yokohama. Some of these imported types have iron spines, fabric canopies, and unfamiliar mechanisms. They are strange to the city's old order. Jirobi inspects one such foreign umbrella. A merchant has brought it in, claiming it was lost outside his store. It folds with a twist and snap, alien to Edo's bamboo architecture. There is no handle design to describe, no lacquer to catalog, no rib pattern unique enough to match. He sets it aside, unsure whether it belongs in the registry at all. In earlier years, he might have filed a marginalia note. Unusual hinge. No maker's mark. Found dry despite storm. Possesses no scent. But now he simply places it into a box labeled unknown form. Outside, Edo is changing. Western clothes have appeared in diplomatic quarters. Dutch texts are studied. Railroads are discussed in court circles. But in the umbrella registry office, the brush continues to whisper across parchment. The umbrella catalog is one of the last holdouts of a world defined by measured repetition. And Jirobi knows this. Each entry now carries with it a certain weight, not only of lost property, but of an old rhythm gradually unraveling. The scrolls have become memory more than function. Fewer people report umbrellas stolen. Even fewer bother to reclaim them. Items pile up. Fewer apprentices learn the old descriptive forms. Even the magistrate himself has hinted that the registry may soon be streamlined. Jirobi's final season summary begins like this. Spring and say 6. Rain frequent. Registrations down. Found objects exceed claims. One umbrella returned to claimant with evident gratitude. Most others remain. In May of that year, a letter arrives from the central office. It is brief and dry. The umbrella registry will no longer be maintained as a separate document. Lost items will be recorded in a general ledger. No more scrolls. No more tags. No more seasonal summaries. He reads the letter twice, then folds it carefully and places it between the pages of his current scroll. The following morning, he unrolls every umbrella record he has written from the past 4 decades. He examines the names, the ink, the brushwork. He finds tiny smudges that recall stormy days, corrections made when he forgot a rib count, marginal drawings of leaves and clouds he once doodled in idle moments. Each one holds the quiet breath of someone who came to report a loss and hoped to be heard. His final entry reads, 1 umbrella, plain brown, smooth handle, slightly warped, found at the gate of the magistrate's office. No complaint filed, no claimant expected, stored out of rain. He places the umbrella in the rack. Then he places the brush down for the last time. By the 1870s, the Meiji Restoration will sweep away much of the Tokugawa bureaucracy. Japan will industrialize. The umbrella, along with clothing, language, and record-keeping, will change. Foldable umbrellas become standard. Bamboo and oil paper designs fade from use. Mass production and new materials replace handcrafted details. The scrolls of the umbrella registry, once stored carefully in cedar boxes, are moved to a side room of the old magistrate building. Some are lost in fires. Some are sold for scrap paper. A few, miraculously, survive, forgotten in temple archives or private collections. A historian in the 1920s finds one. Puzzled by the content, he copies down a few pages. He is struck not by what was recorded, but how carefully it was done. The registry tells no battles, no treaties, but it tells you what people carried, what they lost, how they described the ordinary. It tells you what kind of paint a merchant chose for his handle, what shape an apprentice's canopy was, which parasols were too extravagant, which were mistaken during festival confusion, and how, in a city of 1 million, a tiny object like an umbrella could be important enough to earn its own official tag. So, as you settle into sleep, picture the rain again on Edo's rooftops. A quiet officer, brush in hand. A rack of umbrellas waiting patiently for someone to return. A city built not just on temples or castles, but on records of the everyday. The umbrellas may be gone. The scrolls mostly lost. The office repurposed. But still, the question lingers gently. When no one keeps track of the little things, what else slips quietly through the cracks?